We're about to go live on YouTube.
Should say hello to Sonia and Miriam.
They've already scampered off, it looks
Oh, they
like.
have scampered off. Okay.
No, we're here.
We're still here.
Good, good.
What kind of work have you two done to help things this semester?
We just generally we plan concerts and help with these.
Yeah, generally that's like the most that like we can do at this time. But yeah, it doesn't mean like online concerts are also like quite difficult. Like, a lot of planning and stuff in advance. So it's really cool though, it's a good experience to learn. So
We love it. We like it a lot.
Do you have to corral your other fellow students? Do you make sure that they join, or I don't know, do you have any people you kind of go chase out of the bushes or anything?
Probably no chasing in virtual school. No.
At this
yeah,
point, most of the kids that are still around are the ones that want to be here, fortunately.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so let's go get ahead and get started. So good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us again today. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Andy Ball. I'm the director of vocal music here at Corona Del Mar High School and Middle School. And welcome to the third speaker in our Finding Our Voice speaker series. The goal of the Finding Our Voice speaker series is to spur conversations about inclusion in the vocal music world. Just a couple notes about upcoming events. This coming Friday, October 23rd at 7 o'clock p.m. is our fall concert, Autumn Harmonies, which will be broadcast on the CDM Vocal Music YouTube channel. We are hoping to have a direct link for everybody by Thursday, so look for that. We'll be sending that out in an email. 2 weeks from today is going to be our fourth speaker, which is Dr. Christopher Peterson from Cal State Fullerton. He's a phenomenal choral pedagogue and well known for his work with barbershop and men's ensembles, and he's going to be here to talk about the legacy of barbershop music and what steps have been and need to be made in the world of barbershop and men's choirs as we navigate a more inclusive 21st century. If you feel moved to donate to our program, the link is in the description of this video if you happen to be joining us on YouTube. And thank you to everybody who has already donated to our program. We really appreciate it. If you have questions for our speaker tonight, we do have members of our leadership team. You just met them, Miriam and Sonia, who are going to be monitoring the chat on the webinar here on Zoom, but also this discussion happening on our live stream on YouTube. So even if you're not a member of the CDM Vocal Music family, you're welcome to bring questions to our speaker. Also, if you would like to ask your question out loud, anybody who's in the webinar, you should have the option to raise your hand and we'll be able to turn on your microphone. Do be aware if you're watching our YouTube stream that it runs about 30 seconds behind what we're seeing here in the Zoom. So just if you have some thoughts to contribute, make sure you get those in quickly. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest. Shawn Kirchner is a composer, arranger, songwriter, singer, and pianist based in Los Angeles, whose choral works are performed throughout the world. Shawn has enjoyed an enduring creative relationship with the music director Grant Gershon of the LA Master Chorale since 2001, culminating in his tenure as the LA Master Chorale's Swan Family Composer in Residence from 2012 to 2015. He has also collaborated with such leading ensembles as Conspirare, Santa Fe Desert Chorale, Lorelei Ensemble, San Diego Master Chorale, Los Robles Master Chorale, Coro Alegro, Atlanta Master Chorale, and Tonality. Shawn's creativity is driven by his passion for songwriting, folk and carol traditions, and poetry, but fused with the improvisatory virtuosity of Baroque and bluegrass instrumental traditions. We have had the pleasure of performing some of his musical works here at CDM, including I'll Be On My Way, Weevily Wheat, and Unclouded Day and Hallelujah from his song set Heavenly Home, and our madrigal singers who just had their first in-person rehearsal in 7 months today, just started working on his arrangement of the Kenyan folk song Wana Baraka. So Shawn Kirchner, it is a joy to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored and I'm excited to talk with everyone.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start just a little bit with your career. You're known through most of the vocal world for your arrangement of American folk music. What launched your compositional career and what drew you to the world of Americana?
I'm the late bloomer. I'm the poster child for late bloomers. I didn't major in music. I was a peace studies major in college. And so I think in many ways that was my introduction to folk music. Believe it or not, I was totally immersed in classical piano up until that point. And there was one brief period in my life when I liked opera. That was like 10th and 11th grade in high school. But I came and went with that phase and I never returned. Um, but I don't think I was expecting to really enjoy folk music. In fact, I seem to recall one moment in high school when I was listening to folk music on the local radio station, like the local college radio station where I grew up in Iowa, and they were harmonizing like with perfect fourths. And I remember like arrogantly saying, don't they even know that thirds and sixths sound better?" Or, but now you'll see if you check out some of my music that I'm not afraid of using fourths. Anyway, I used to not like folk music. I just think I was clueless, quite honestly. But my friends and I at college founded a peace choir with the peace studies majors and the international students. So we started performing American folk music and music from around the world, and that's when I kind of started doing a little bit of arranging. So I still hadn't thought I would go back into music, but I hit my mid-20s and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I decided to go back into choral music because I had so much fun working with that that choir in college. And it still took 5 more years for me to first try to arrange a piece. But Wana Baraka, that your one group you said just started on, that was my first piece. And I had learned it when I was in volunteer service touring with a quartet across the country, and we were doing folk music. So I guess when it comes down to it, I was getting my inputs in folk music quite a bit along the way, but it took me a while to kind of really fuse it with my classical tradition.
So, broadly speaking, and I know that this is a very open question, what is American folk music?
Well, we have multiple streams. We're a country. Migration is my favorite way to think about uh, the political realities of the entire world, because the reality is people don't stay where they're at. If you look at human history in big expanses of time, people don't stay where they're at. They migrate to different continents for different reasons. And so we have Americans showing up from all kinds of migratory histories. Native Americans coming across from Asia 10,000 years ago, um, European Americans coming over with Christopher Columbus and afterwards, African Americans with forced migration through enslavement, um, um, and then later many other immigrant streams from all over the world coming to this country from Asia and many other European countries, etc. So we have such a rich tradition. Oh my gosh! So that's what's awesomely unique about American folk traditions, is that there's so many of them. So I would consider spirituals to be a folk tradition out of African American history, gospel, jazz, deriving from African influences. We have British Isles folk songs coming into the Appalachian regions and across the country. Um, my people are German. What did they bring? Like little squeeze boxes? I don't even know. But I also consider hymns to be a folk tradition, because for me, I guess a folk song is any song you can sing by heart, a song that has gotten into you and that you love it enough that you've just made it a permanent part of you. And so I would consider, Amazing Grace. My mom would sing hymns while she did dishes. And I guess my way of getting out of doing dishes was I would just go to the piano and start playing along with her. I play by ear and I've always improvised. So I would just start playing along with whatever hymn my mom was humming. But that's folk music too. That's music of the people. So yeah, we have lots of rich traditions, and they also influence each other, which is the other fascinating thing about American cultures. These traditions are always playing with each other. So we have such a vibrant music tradition. It's wonderful to be American from a musical standpoint.
So, in the world of choral music, and honestly in the country at large, we have so many different styles of music between rock and roll and R&B and rap and all this stuff. What do you see as the role of American folk music, both in the choral music world and in the country as a whole today?
Oh wow, that's a really interesting question. Um, I mean, in the world of choral music, folk music is super important because um, everybody loves a folk arrangement. Everybody loves to sing it. Audiences love to hear it. And so the question might be why? Um, for me, I've been a songwriter my whole life. I wrote my first song when I was 8. Spring came, and I grew up in Iowa. And when spring came in a northern climate, you really noticed. I mean, it was a huge difference. But the inspiration of spring made me want to write my first song when I was 8. But I've written songs my whole life. And to strike that magical balance between good lyrics that really capture the feeling that you're feeling and then a melody that fits really well with it, when you strike that balance just right, and if you're lucky enough to create a song that can live more than one generation, then you've hit pure gold. Because for me, we might kind of condescend to some of these old fashioned folk songs, but we wouldn't sing them for hundreds of years if they weren't great songs. And sad to say, but only a small fraction of today's current popular songs will make it into that elite echelon of songs that survive forever in our culture. Just a small percentage of today's songs will survive. But the folk music that we have from the past is only the best of the best. The best melodies, the best lyrics. That's all we have is the best of the best. So we might look down on folk music, but really it's actually an incredible quality of material.
So, as a sort of an extension of that, I want to paint a picture for you. So, I teach, in addition to teaching high school, I do teach middle school. And one of the things that is part of my job is selling this genre of choral music to these students who have never been in a choir before. They listen to whatever it is that they're listening to. What do you say to people who, when you play a piece of folk music, say like, "Oh, this is old music. Why are we doing this?"
Well, hopefully you don't have to say anything, because the moment it's like opening up a present, like or it's like opening up a Jack in the Box, if people know what that is. I mean, there's so much life in these songs that hopefully just being exposed to the song is enough. There's well, you mentioned Weevily Wheat. um, I didn't even know Weevily Wheat until I worked with Alice Parker about, oh, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And she's like one of the matriarchs of American choral music. I learned Weevily Wheat in a little sample of folk songs she sent to us. But boy, that's a snappy song. My nephew, when he was like 4 years old, I started singing, Charlie, he's a fine young man. Charlie, he's a dandy. Charlie likes to kiss the girls and he can do it handy. I don't want none of your Weevily Wheat. I don't want none of your barley. I want fine flour and half an hour to bake a cake for Charlie. My little 4-year-old nephew thought that was the greatest thing he'd ever heard. Um, and I think that little kids are actually really good judges of interesting material. Like, anyway, I've never met a little kid who does not like Weebly Wheat. Just the name Charlie just grabs them. I don't know. I would like to think that there's fun inside the song that you can't resist. That's what I would say. So hopefully the song sells itself.
That's great. I want to go to a couple of questions that my students have asked.
Okay.
I'm going to paraphrase the first one. So we have a lot of folk music in this country, as you talked about. Where do you look when you're looking for something new to work with, as far as the folk music that you want to spend time arranging?
Yeah. You know, uh, I get given old songbooks and especially old hymnals from people at my church. They're cleaning out their house and they're moving to a retirement center and they think Shawn needs one of these. But I truly am interested in a new to me old songbook, because invariably there'll at least be one gem that you never knew before. Um, but I guess I just keep my ears open, because you just have to wait for it to reach out and grab you. And I've had a fair amount of success with my choral arrangements of folk music, but I think I always try to give a whole lot of credit to the original songwriter, because I always tell everyone you would not be responding to this piece if you weren't in some measure responding to that song itself. So like Unclouded Day has been really popular, one of my pieces. But if Unclouded Day, the song in its raw form, didn't have some zest and some energy inside it that grabbed you, I couldn't have done anything with it. And yeah, granted, I did all kinds of crazy things with it. I wrote a bluegrass fugue and I don't know, I did all kinds of stuff. But I wouldn't have wanted to do that stuff if there wasn't an energy inside the song in the first place. So just for me, just keeping my ears peeled, new things that come across my path if they grab me. But the song has to do the convincing itself. Um, the song has to be alive by itself, and then you can make something great out of it.
So you've described hymn singing as an American folk tradition. What do you say to people who are coming into choral music but may not be Christian about that tradition? How do you rationalize it to people for whom the faith sentiment of the hymns doesn't really translate? Because I think about this in particular as a public school teacher, and I have to make very careful choices about the sort of music that I have to program that when it comes with religious content, even though about 70% of the music that I have to choose from is religious content.
Yeah. I'm acquainted with one of the foremost scholars of sacred harp music, which is the shape note singing tradition, which originated in New England with William Billings and singing schools, and a certain kind of rugged, rustic kind of American hymns, where the individual lines, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, kind of make sense. When you put them together, they may or may not make the most beautiful chords you ever did hear, but it's so much gosh dang fun to sing. Well, Jesse Carlsberg is like the foremost scholar of sacred harp music. He's Jewish. He adores sacred harp music. Most weekends he spends singing about heaven, hell, and Jesus, which is basically the only thing that sacred harp music is about. There's a funny story about sacred harp tradition because about half the songs are in major modes and half are in minor modes. And there's a quote where someone said, "Well, you'll sure love singing the major modes, but it's the minor ones that'll get you into heaven because it'll scare you, enough." But anyway, um, I personally think it's just most helpful to view these, even though these are religious traditions of religious music, they're also fully cultural. So for myself, I think different school districts might have their own philosophies, but for me, I think you can just make the argument this is a cultural phenomenon. Yes, it has religious text, but it's a whole subculture. It's part of American culture. So for me, that's how I view these things. And frankly, there's so much richness in these traditions. I'd hate for anyone to be deprived of it. Um, I say, let's experience all of it. Um, yeah.
Great. Going to another question from one of my students. Um, would sports game songs be classified as folk music due to their widespread popularity? If so, would a song like Seven Nation Army be seen as more of a folk song due to its popularity through sports games? And as she asked that, I'm thinking about like things like songs like "Take Me Out to the Ballpark" and
Yeah.
things like that.
I think those definitely would count. I think the broadest possible definition is a great definition because there's probably whole sectors of our society that don't consider themselves musical. They don't consider themselves singers. But in reality, they know songs. They know Happy Birthday. They know Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I must confess, I don't know the song that was mentioned.
I don't either. It's okay.
I spend too much time working on writing pieces. I don't get my TV in. But anyway, yeah, I think any song that the people know, songs of the people, that is my definition of folk music. So it can be a really wide definition.
Another question from one of our students. Have you ever traveled somewhere that has changed your view on folk music?
Huh, that's a good question. I was an exchange student in China for a year. Um, And I studied, I grew up playing viola. I'm a triplet. And so in fourth grade, we started off my sister on violin, me on viola, and my brother on cello. Um, and so but piano's my main instrument. But the erhu is the Chinese word for two string. It's kind of like a two-stringed fiddle, but you play it sitting like a cello. Um, I learned a lot of Chinese folk music, but I think I'm not sure if my I think maybe what I learned was just that folk music is more alike than different. Folk music from other cultures often uses some of the same kinds of scales, often a pentatonic scale or a gap scale. A lot of Appalachian music does, and so does Chinese folk stuff. So I think there's actually, for me, maybe the learning is how much alike these traditions actually are. And that the themes, are the universal themes, love or family or your love for where you live. I mean, yeah, that's my off the top of my head answer to that question.
Great. So one of the things when we were corresponding before this talk, you mentioned that one of the things that you sort of view folk music as is as a living tradition. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does it mean for folk music to be a living tradition?
Yeah, well, for me, the big one is that you get to mess around with the lyrics as much as you want. Because yeah, folk songs, I think one of the reasons why they're as good as they are is because they actually have been refined with age. And my metaphor often for folk music is, I don't know if you've ever seen kind of these smoothed out round river stones. They're kind of flat and oval. But, thousands and millions, I guess, of years have worn all the rough edges off these rocks. And for me, that's a little bit like what the folk tradition is. The songs just get better and better because if there's anything about them that didn't work, tradition will rub off the edge and fix it. So, so what would be really interesting is to go back through time and see some of our favorite folk songs and see what they were actually like 300 years ago, because we might discover, oh, it was kind of creaky. It kind of worked, but it wasn't so great. But oh, starting 150 years ago, it really got mellow, and they got rid of that one verse that nobody liked. So now we don't even remember it had that verse. We just think it only has three verses or whatever. Um, and for myself, also because I work in church music a lot, and people's mindsets change through time. Like, for example, in the field of church music, inclusive, you used the word inclusive tradition earlier, starting off tonight. Inclusive language for genders. The idea that does men, MEN, does that stand for all people, or does that stand for people of the male gender? Well, at one time, men was supposed to be inclusive of all people, and our minds have changed about that. So I change church music words all the time because some old hymns people just can't put in their mouths anymore if you have to use some of those words. So for me, that's an example of the living tradition of folk music. Um, as the times change, you might not be able to sing a certain verse anymore. Certain songs we might not be able to sing anymore. Some songs we might have retired because they just don't suit us anymore. We've grown beyond the mindset that they had. So that's another example of the living tradition is we actually can usher some songs off stage, say sorry, um, or transform it if possible. Say goodbye if it's not possible to transform it.
And one of the types of music that you sort of brought up as a living tradition are patriotic songs, which was sort of an eye opener for me because my kids have sung the national anthem, and yes, there are, like you said, there are verses that we don't sing anymore, but we usually stick to the first one. But I'm sure everybody here knows a verse of America the Beautiful or God Bless America. They feel pretty solid, like they feel pretty set in stone in a lot of ways. But I shared your arrangement of America the Beautiful with my students in anticipation of this, which I think is a really beautiful resetting of some of that text. Can you elaborate a little bit as to why we should view patriotic songs as a living tradition, as a living folk tradition, rather than sort of like the way that we're taught them in elementary school?
Well, I think people grow. We grow. We don't think the same things we thought 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We might have changed our minds about things. Um, I view my life differently. I just turned 50. I view my life differently at age 50 than I did at age 35. And I think as a nation matures, I think we're getting to understand ourselves as a nation differently. And well, I think everyone knows that when the Constitution was first set in place, a small number of the people living here in this country actually had the right to vote. So I think, it wasn't until 100 years ago that women had the right to vote. African Americans have faced lots of hurdles to voting rights for many years since the end of the Civil War. It's not been easy to have that kind of equality. I think we as America are growing up, and we still have a lot of growing up to do, but in terms of thinking about who we are, and when we say we, who all is included in we? So the reason I wanted to transform America the Beautiful is because I love the melody. I like the sentiment. I think she did a great job on the words. However, when you start reading some of the verses, you realize that it's a smaller we than we actually are now. So verse 2 is about the settling of the country. O beautiful for pilgrim feet, whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. So essentially, she's saying that pilgrims and their descendants were the people that made the tracks and trails across the country. But that's actually not true. Native Americans settled 10,000 years earlier, and they're the ones that made the tracks and the trails across the country, and not from east to west, but from west to east. So it's simply just trying to be, I'm not trying to be revolutionary here, I'm actually just trying to be truthful about how our country actually was settled, who actually were the first people to make trails across the wilderness. And it wasn't the descendants of the pilgrims. So for me, if we is going to include all Americans from all backgrounds and all migration histories, as I used that term earlier, we have to expand our minds, and some of our songs we can transform. And I hope we don't consider it like we're being shot. I think rather it's like we're shedding a skin that no longer suits us. Like a snake, it outgrows that skin. That's okay. We can leave that skin behind, but the essence and the best of who we are can keep going forward.
Great. A question from YouTube. We are now almost a century since the development of the Great American Songbook, and approaching the same for early rock and roll. Do you feel these styles have undergone the same folk erosion that you described for other American folk music?
I think off the top of my head, to just brainstorm an answer to this, I think if we had statistics about covers, that would tell us a lot of stuff. Which songs get covered by the next generation's artists? Which songs get covered by 2 generations later? Because, yeah, rock and roll's been around for decades and decades at this point. So which songs keep getting covered? I think that right there is your exact answer of which ones are making it in the folk tradition. And the new artist puts their own spin on it, but that song is inside there. And that is the sifting happening right there. They won't choose to cover a song that they don't love and they don't feel.
From one of my students, do you like a cappella or singing with instruments more?
Okay, I cannot tell a lie. I love to play the piano for singers. I love it. You were mentioning Unclouded Day. That song kind of became famous as a cappella song, but it was actually premiered on Pentecost Sunday morning at my church, the morning of the LA Master Chorale concert when they performed it a cappella at Disney Concert Hall. Both were done that day. But at my church, my mentor in music and creativity, who taught me to play banjo, he played banjo with Unclouded Day. And I played piano banjo. Oh, they tell me of a home far beyond the skies. They tell me of a land far away. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. I just love to get my fingers going. I like to egg the singers on. So I love a cappella singing, but I think it's a whole lot more fun to add instruments to it. You know, just fun to add some extra stuff.
So that's an excellent segue to another question that I have. So, while many choirs have a pianist available, it's much rarer to find a choir performing alongside a banjo or a fiddle or something like that. Can you speak to the way that those instruments and the instruments of the folk tradition of America have influenced your compositional style?
Yeah. And this is something I've only kind of gradually realized I was doing. But because I've had a chance to talk about it more, I'm starting to step back and realize. Um, my mentor, who I just mentioned, Steve Kinsey, um, taught me frailing or claw hammer banjo style, which, is like eighth note, 16th, 16th. So there's a drone string that always gets plucked as the final 16th note. Anyway, I started performing with Steve, and so I kind of developed a piano style that would complement his banjo. And I let the hands interact with the way that makes it sound more difficult and complicated than it is. My left hand is just doing bum 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 bum, but if the right hand goes da 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 da. So with the bum 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 bum, the thumb of the left hand fits in that little gap, and so it makes it sound more vibrant and notey. That's an example of a technique that I've really loved to put into some of my choral music. I just think it makes the song just kick. I love bluegrass bands. Another thing I often do in my piano writing is I add like little. Can everyone hear that? I had like little grace notes, little scoops. A couple years ago, I wrote a Stephen Foster "Hard Times Come Again No More" arrangement, and on the guitar or the banjo, those are called hammer-ons, where you pluck the string, but then you switch frets as you play it. Da da. So I'm essentially using a guitar or a banjo technique. And then for this "Hard Times Come Again No More," I also use the drone string on this final 16th note. Ba ba da 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 ba da 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 da. So let us pause in life's trials and count its many tears, while we all sup sorrow with the poor. Anyway, yeah, so I've just enjoyed using the bluegrass style on piano. I've just enjoyed kind of developing that and having fun with it over the years. And I'm kind of picky about it now. When my editors are trying to engrave a new piece, they fight with me because the notation doesn't really exist to show banjo technique on piano. And there's ways that because a drone string on a banjo will keep ringing, it's the G string, and it just keeps sounding. It doesn't get shut off. So I try to show this tie, and then I try to show it in like a smaller size note so they don't play it too loud because it's just supposed to be plucked lightly. And my editors get so mad that I want to change the engraving rules, but I feel like I can't show pianists how to play it right if I don't change the engraving rules a little bit to just show you just let this note hang on. I don't have to tie it to another note. I just want to show that it rings. So I just put a tie, but I don't tie it to another note. And then they get all flustered.
Good. They should. Awesome. Another question from YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. You mentioned that there is usually something in songs that speak to you before you begin arranging them. Do you find that you gravitate more towards melodies or text, or what are things that you look for in a song to arrange?
You know what I look for? I look for that moment of heart, um, where you almost, I guess my philosophy on what art is, to me, art is soul to soul communication that happens through whatever medium the artist is using. So we're musicians, we're sound artists. So through the medium of sound, we're making soul to soul communication. And there's a wonderful Persian proverb that says, what comes from the heart goes to the heart. And I think by some magic that I do not understand, that is what happens in these songs. You know, that songwriter had something deeply in their heart, and it does communicate to that other person. Um, and that's what you hear, that's what you sense. And the human heart, we're good. I mean, you know how if you're in a room and suddenly someone starts feeling a little bit of emotion and their voice cracks a little bit, everyone in the room knows what just happened. It's like we have a sensor inside us that knows when true emotion is being expressed. And for me, that's the magic of what happens in music is that we get to do that. Um, I'm starting to forget what the question was, but oh, yes, but that is what I look for. I look for that feeling of that authenticity of that feeling. One of my own folk songs that I hope becomes part of the song tradition is called "Rain Come Down," and I wrote it right after a school shooting, the first school shooting in the modern era. Um, and I was driving home in the rain in Chicago where I was living, and the song just came to me. But let me just sing like the chorus, because I think you'll feel that there's a feeling in it. And for me, finding that feeling in the center of any other folk song is what makes me want to set it. Let me just sing a few lines of this. Come rain, come down. Come rain, come down. Heaven's tears of mercy come running down. Say no words, it is too soon. Say no words out loud, but wrap your quiet arms around, hide us in your cloud, etc. Come rain, come down. Anyway, but I mean, I was feeling something so strongly when I wrote that song, and so I think that it's in there somehow. My feelings got into that music, into those words, into that melody, and I hope it will always be there. So anyone, you know, in the future will be able to sing that song and feel their way back to what I was feeling. So that's what I look for in a song that I'm going to arrange. Yeah, I gave you a different example. I thought of an example of a Scottish folk song that has that little kernel of heart, but maybe I'll save that for another comment.
Want to go back to one of the things you were talking about, a living tradition and being able to shed certain things. I want to ask a question regarding one of the darker pieces of American folk music history. As I've been discussing American folk music with my students in anticipation of this talk, I included a discussion about blackface minstrelry. For those of you watching who may not know, minstrel performances were the most popular form of entertainment in America through the 1800s and into the early 1900s, and consisted typically of troops of white men in blackface performing as caricatures of African Americans while slave and free. This is a part of our history that has been widely condemned as as abhorrent and racist, and yet so many songs that were popularized by minstrelsy are still being performed around the country. Songs such as Working on the Railroad or Oh Susanna are still being taught in our elementary schools. Turkey in the Straw is still being played by ice cream trucks, and Stephen Foster is still widely known as one of the most successful American songwriters, despite a lot of his output being written for minstrel shows. So why do you think this music is still as widely performed as it is, despite its history? And how does this music reflect on the other types of music in the folk canon? And what, if anything, can and should we do about that history?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I was talking earlier about growing up, and we becomes a bigger we. And so I think there's a lot of the ways things were approached during that period where the we was a small we. You know, like the white audience's we did not include African Americans as we. Um, so I think a lot of stuff wouldn't have happened the way it did if people had a bigger view of who they were and who Americans were. But it did happen the way it did. Um, I think the reason that some of these songs are still sung is because like a good song never dies. Um, I think honestly that's the truth. A good song has life in it, and it's going to be really hard to kill it. And if it doesn't have completely unacceptable lyrics, it will probably survive, and it might even be transformed and be enabled to survive. Um, but a good song, you know, Stephen Foster, I actually didn't know too much about his history, but he actually wrote many kinds of songs. He wrote hymns. Frankly, I just think he wanted to be a songwriter, and he was writing for what were the forms available to him at the time to be a commercial songwriter. And so, because, as you said, minstrel shows was one of the main forms of entertainment, that was what he did. I think another thing that the popularity might indicate is I think the vibrancy inside folk traditions and inside African American folk singing traditions, people know where the life is, and so I think it's not bad for people to be attracted to music that they find extremely exciting, and maybe it's different than what they know. It's not wrong to be excited to be excited by a different style. Um, it's only wrong if you're viewing people in a demeaning way, but it's not wrong to be attracted to a different style of music that you just personally find wonderful. Um, so I think, yeah, the sifting has continued. Several states in the South have Stephen Foster songs as their state songs. My Old Kentucky Home, and I think Florida also. Um, Old Folks at Home might be the Florida state song. Anyway, they've had to update lyrics themselves um, to make a song acceptable and to bring it up to date and to have a bigger we represented in the song. Some songs can't make it, and that's okay. It's okay to leave some songs behind. But I also don't think we should forever cancel um, if a songwriter contributed something positive, let them be remembered for something positive that they did. I mean, for me as a songwriter, I kind of consider songs my kids. They go out into the world, and if people like them, they like them. If they don't, they don't. But they have their own relationship to my song. It's no longer me. And so I kind of feel like, yeah, Stephen Foster was a person of his time, and his time was not as progressive as we are. Some of his songs should not be sung. Others of his songs that are neutral or don't have any problems, why would we cancel something really positive that he had to contribute? And for me, Hard Times, the one that I arranged, is just an absolutely gorgeous song. And I think it's, you know, widely loved by many, many Americans. And there's not uh, anything that you can say is a problem with that song. So it's complex, but I do think that people are attracted to good music. So that's another fact of this. If the music is good, people are going to be attracted to it.
Great. Um, so a few more questions from my students. Um, how does folk music influence your daily life, and how has your view of folk music changed across your life?
Um, how does folk music? Well, quite frankly, if I listen to music, I mean, sometimes I turn on the classical radio station in the car, but more often I listen to KCRW, kind of like indie alt rock type stuff. Because I sing with LA Master Chorale, and when you've been in like a 3 hour Brahms rehearsal, you don't want to listen to more classical music on the way home. But for myself, if I listen to music, I'm usually writing pieces, so I can't listen to music. But I love me some Dolly Parton. You know, she's got some bluegrass albums where she went back to her roots from East Tennessee, and she's got some fantastic bluegrass players that play on these albums. They're just like the best fiddler, the best banjo players, the best mandolin players. I love listening to them. They're just brilliant. So that's the kind of stuff I enjoy listening to. But actually, I just got singing a song I learned in elementary school, and this is kind of a coincidence. Just last night, an acquaintance I know from San Diego Master Chorale said that she had been FaceTiming my elementary school music teacher, Miss Spandy, who retired to Fullerton. I didn't know she lived in California. I thought she lived in Iowa. I didn't even know she was still living. Well, she just had a FaceTime with her yesterday. And I told this person, I said, you'll never believe this, but just like 2 days ago, I was singing the call and response song, folk song, I learned in her elementary music class. And let me just sing a few things for you because I think I always just loved roots music. I just did. I was like, what, 9 years old? Hey, hey, Jane, Jane, my lordy lord, Jane, Jane. I'm gonna buy, Jane, Jane, 3 muley cows, Jane, Jane, one for to milk, Jane, Jane, one to plow my corn, Jane, Jane, one for to talk to, Jane, Jane, when my work's done, Jane, Jane, hey, hey, Jane, Jane, my, that is hypnotic. Oh my gosh, that song is hypnotic. Yeah, the songs are about agriculture. I mean, the words are about agriculture, but the song itself is hypnotic. Um, and as a kid, I totally instinctually responded to that song. Like I never forgot it. I just thought it was an awesome song, and it is an awesome song. It's an amazing song. Um, and it could have been used in planting. I'm a big organic gardener, and you mentioned Wana Baraka. Wana Baraka comes from Kenya, and we couldn't find the original songwriter in East Africa to give songwriter royalties to. So I give every year the songwriter royalties to a sustainable agricultural project in Kenya. And my friend Philip, who I met in Northern California when he was interning in a special agricultural training center that my friends worked at. I met him. We started weeding together because it's a really great way to become friends with someone. Is just weed a row of vegetables. Sit there and talk while you're weeding. He knew Wana Baraka. He grew up singing it. It's like Jesus Loves Me to a Kenyan person. Everybody knows that song. So anyway, I'm connected with him on Facebook. Periodically, he'll send me these amazing videos of some tribes, people in his region that still sing planting songs. And these are the most amazing things to see. It's like a whole row of about 8 guys with these wooden hoes, and they're singing a very complex musically song that has like polyrhythms and these cool recurrences, and then they all strike their hoe into the ground at the same time. This is like an ancient tradition of planting, and the fact that they do it in perfect harmony while singing together, I think is about the most amazing thing. So anyway, he keeps posting these amazing videos that he finds of people in his part of the world still keeping their traditional planting practices alive. But for me, it's interesting to think about Jane Jane as a planting song or a work song. Um, but yeah, human culture has amazing roots. And we've lost a lot, but we've also kept a lot.
So, want to follow up with a question about Wana Baraka.
Okay.
I love hearing these stories behind these pieces of music and these arrangements and things like that. And what I love about your story about this song is you have so many connections back to the origin, and you're trying to give back. I don't know that that is universally the approach that arrangers take of music from places like Africa or Asia or something like that. So what in your experience, what do you need to do as an arranger of these folk songs that are not necessarily of your country or of your culture in order to make sure that it's an experience of cultural sharing rather than one of cultural appropriation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And times change. Thinking changes, and we go through phases of thinking about things where something that was okay 20 years ago is currently not as okay. Um, I came of age in choral music in my mid to late 20s when multiculturalism was celebrated to the nth degree because I think choral musicians, choral teachers were so excited as a way to educate their students about the rest of the world. And if you can do that by sharing songs, where's the downside? This is only a positive thing to help expand your students' minds, to help them realize there's a world out there. There's people with their own traditions, and we can learn to respect them and learn a little bit about them. So that was just 100% A-OK to do. Earth Songs, for example, was a new publisher that came up out of Oregon, and they were an incredibly successful new publisher, and that was their business. Their business was sharing really beautifully arranged songs from other cultures with the American choral tradition. And people just wanted to do the stuff. It's very interesting, very different, musically complex, rhythmically complex. Yeah, it seemed like there was no downside. Now, of course, we have gotten quite nuanced and sophisticated at our perceptions about who's benefiting from profits that are generated by this stuff. And I think that wasn't a question people were asking 20 years ago. People 20 years ago were just glad to get the material and glad to learn these songs. Now we're asking better questions about what does it mean for you to profit from a song that rose among a whole different people, especially if they are very economically deprived or disadvantaged. What does it mean for you to be the one getting rich on their songs? And I think we've just grown in our sense of conscience, and that's a good thing. So I mean, I'll go back to my comment that I kind of made during the minstrel question was people can't help it when they're genuinely attracted to another song or another style. And it's not their fault. The first time I heard gospel piano playing, like out of the black church, oh my gosh, my brain went crazy. I was listening to a Joan Baez album in high school, and well, I can't. Anyway, I didn't know how to play like that, but I wanted to learn. I was just attracted to it. Am I wrong to be attracted to great gospel piano playing? It's awesome music. Like, how can I be wrong to think this is like about the most exciting thing I've ever heard in my life? But we've become much wiser about realizing who's making the money on this. And frankly, I've raised the question with publishers because we might want to hold the arranger responsible. Let's just remember that the arranger gets 5% of the royalties and the songwriter gets 5% and the publisher gets 90%. So who's profiting off this music? It's not even the arranger very much. It's the publisher. So one of my publishers is Boozy and Hawkes in London, and I work with the head of publishing there, my friend James, and he and I have these conversations because he's expressed interest in certain pieces of mine. One of my newer pieces that my publishing company has published is called Away and in Danger, and it's a takeoff on Away in the Manger, but it was written by a New Zealand hymn writer about the refugee crisis. So it's about children who are in boats trying to escape to a safe country because their country is in the middle of a civil war. Well, what does it mean for Boozy and Hawkes to make 90% of the money What about the refugees who inspired this song in the first place? They are so disadvantaged. They have nothing. They left everything behind. So we decided with my own company that refugee programs have to receive some of the proceeds of this. And I told James, if you guys want to publish this, we have to have some kind of arrangement with United Nations refugee programs or something else that will have to be in place before I would consider letting you guys publish this piece. So I think we've just gotten wiser at asking those questions. And also, I'm gonna add one final thing. I'm a songwriter. Because I'm a songwriter, I really respect how much I got out of the song. Yes, so what? I have a clever arrangement. The arrangement would not even exist if the song didn't exist. So with my own publishing company, I've tried to even be brave and give full 50% to the songwriter instead of 5%. If I'm the publisher, I get 100% of the profits. Well, if I'm the arranger, what if I take 50 and give 50% to the songwriter, because it wouldn't exist without the songwriter. And as a songwriter, I know, give the songwriter a little credit. So I'm trying to push the envelope and give the songwriter 50% of the proceeds with my own publishing company, not 5%.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you. I want to end with just a few more questions from my students.
Okay.
Are there any musicians that have greatly influenced your songs and arrangements? And if so, who are they?
Well, we were talking about Juana Baraka. So one of when I was in grad school in my mid-20s, we went to a regional choral convention, and the National Choir of Kenya came to be guest artists. And I was blown away by their concert. All a cappella, no drums, by the way. Drumming is more West African. East African choral music tends to just be a cappella. And I swore to goodness that almost the entire concert was in the same key. Like everything was in D major. I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating that much. I was so happy listening to that concert. And it kind of taught me that music does not necessarily have to go all over the place in terms of keys. You can use simple techniques that just work really well, interesting rhythmic devices, good material. I think for my own work, I don't go for flashy, although some of the pieces might come across as flashy and fun. I just want them to be good, that they will achieve their place in the repertoire just because somehow they're good. They have good architecture or something. I think I've learned that from just hearing other good arrangements. And also, I think just folk music itself has taught me a lot. A strong melody with great lyrics, almost nothing can beat that. You don't even need to have any harmonies. Just listening to a great folk singer sing a great melody with great lyrics is musically satisfying. So everything else is gravy. So for me, letting the quality, trusting the quality of the material is maybe something I would say.
Great. And then we'll just end with this one. Of your pieces, which one have you had the most fun with?
Oh, I guess I'll just say, just because someone has been emailing me about this piece. In the middle of July, a couple years ago, I wrote a jazz Joy to the World. And that was about the most fun I ever had, writing a jazz Joy to the World. I kind of turned the melody upside down. So instead of, it would, joy to the world, the Lord is come, let earth not die, let earth receive her King, let every heart prepare him room, let every heart prepare him room, let heaven and nature sing, let heaven and nature sing, hallelujah, let heaven and nature sing. etc., etc. I had a whole lot of fun with that. That was fun.
Well, fantastic. Shawn Kirchner, it has been such a joy to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us on this talk. I think we learned a lot and definitely gave us a lot to think about as we think about folk music and just sort of its histories and things like that. So it has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all your great prep work and lead time, and I had a great time. Thank you so much, Andy.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Bye, everybody.